Hi, it's Dave Michaels. This is Real Time Recorded. Welcome to week 48. How are you, Zeus?
I'm doing pretty good. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving, Dave. Week 48. That's we're rolling along in 2020, aren't we?
I'm beginning to get optimistic. We might make it to week 52 after all. Wasn't so sure about halfway through this year. So this is Thanksgiving week. Yes, you point that out already. You can see I'm wearing my one and only poultry shirt. I guess I have one more poultry shirt than you do.
Yeah, that's I've never invested in a poultry shirt, but I guess I should do that.
Well, this is a good educational, informative one. So since there was no news this week, at least nothing too significant, we're going to do something different. We're going to talk about the top 5 turkeys of enterprise communications for 2020. And Zeus and I went through this. We had a lot of debate and argument because there were a lot of good turkeys to choose from. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah. We had no shortage of turkeys. That's for sure.
No shortage of turkeys.
Boil it down to 5.
And actually, I take that back. I said there was no news. Like, one of our turkeys is actually from this week's news. So we'll just leave it at that. So let's get started. We're going to do 5. We're going to count them down, starting with number 5, which was the I'll call it the Zoom security debacle, which took place right after the pandemic started. The worst possible timing. Toronto's Citizen Lab came out with a damaging report revealing a whole bunch of crap that Zoom was doing wrong in terms of security practices. And then right after that came the whole Zoom bombing trend. Worst possible timing for Zoom, worst possible timing for the world because we were all using Zoom. But I have to say, Zoom did a great job of recovery. They did clear, consistent communications. They didn't argue with anything. They said, in fact, they fell on the sword and said, we're going to fix it. They owned it. They did their first acquisition ever, something they had to do completely over video for that matter, when they acquired Keybase. And the Zoom bombing thing, although it's called Zoom bombing and Zoom got a lot of attention for it, to be fair, really wasn't anything to do with Zoom. Almost every video company had a problem with that because they were designed for not big mass consumer usage. And almost every video company corrected it soon after Zoom got called out for it. So Zeus, what do you think of Zoom security number 5?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. You say the timing was bad, but we would never have known about it had it not been for the pandemic because it wouldn't have become a tool that we all used, right? So people mention Zoom all the time and sometimes aren't even using Zoom. So that's what's kind of interesting about it. Now, that happened because they prioritized user experience over security. And in some ways, you could argue that they wouldn't have had success they did had they actually prioritized security over user experience. So they got the user base, then they fixed the security issues. But I do think it was good that Eric Yuan, their CEO, actually was very open about it. He was very forthright about it. He said that, they made some errors, and not only did they make an acquisition, they hired some big time security talent. And ever since then, they've actually been very transparent about everything they're doing in security. They do constant updates. And so while I think that, they kind of let us off in the turkey category, I do think they recovered quite well. And you could say they have some nice stuffing and cranberries now. Number 4 on our list of turkeys is the Microsoft Duo phone. Everyone loves new phones, right? And this is another example of how I just think Microsoft, you and I disagree with this. I just think they shouldn't even bother doing, hardware. It's not something other than Xbox. It's hard to think of one thing they've ever done well on the hardware side. They've done an okay job of building reference designs to let partners build devices, but even there, I think they kind of limit their partners from being innovative. So it's the mobile phone market's not one they seem to understand. They've tried it before, and it's just like whatever they try seems to flop. I kind of get the idea what they were trying to do, but boy, that was about as tricky. That was a big time turkey leg.
They've never had a successful phone at a Microsoft, and so this just adds to the list. I think this kind of is a good example of the new shiny syndrome, because when they first announced it, I saw Twitter get super excited about this whole new phone, this new format. Microsoft's in it. Microsoft's going to win it. And I'm looking at this thing going, like a $1,400 phone, the appears to have an underpowered battery. Once they actually shipped it, it turned out the plastic was no good and cracked and turned yellow. But my bigger concern was that this was a totally different form factor. There were no obvious apps. To make something like this successful was going to take a lot of work. And I don't know if Microsoft's the right company to do that. And so I kind of feel vindicated, because when they first announced it, I was a little suspicious of it, and I was surprised by how excited people were. But it was indeed a turkey. And to your point earlier about whether Microsoft should be in hardware or not, Apple has been teaching the world, teaching Microsoft specifically, for 30, 40 years, how important it is to have software and hardware integrated. Cisco's done a good job with this, with room systems, and Microsoft's been getting better at hardware. They have started off as a joke with their Surface PCs, but they or Surface tablets, but they got pretty good at it. They're doing much better at hardware, but and I think it's important that companies do hardware and software together. And now we're getting a whole new lesson on that from Apple, now that they're getting the chip design. So I think that this idea of a pure software company is kind of a fantasy if you want to be a market leader of some kind. So number 3 is the leadership change at Poly that Zeus and I believe happened prematurely. The company, the new brand after the acquisition or the merger between Plantronics and Polycom was announced. I don't know when the merger happened, but they kind of launched in Enterprise Connect 2019. So that was in the March timeframe. And so that takes a lot of time. I mean, they basically created a new company. They had a lot of things to change. And unfortunately, they got hit with a lot of issues. They got hit with supply chain issues. They got hit with some sales leadership issues. They couldn't get the products out the door. They did launch one new product as a combined company and their new leadership, which was the X30 and X50, which was actually a big success. It would have been even a bigger success if they got past their supply chain issues, which of course they were working through. And it seemed like all this stuff was kind of in play, but the stock was going down. And I think the company felt they had to make some changes, and Joe decided to leave Poly too early, in our opinion. And of course, when the CEO changes, there's a whole domino effect. So we saw Amy, the CMO, leave, and then her replacement, Darius, has also left. We've got Tim Root, who just recently left. I heard a rumor that Tom Pearl was going to leave, but he seems to be there, so hopefully he stays around. But the new guy hasn't really made a whole big of an impression yet with the analyst community yet. Looking forward to meeting him.
I do think that the Joe Burton resignation, if you will, was poorly timed. I do think that they had a lot of, they had a lot of things happen, right? They brought Tom in to read product, and he's done a great job of they in some ways, I've talked to Tom about this, they had to take a step back for the go forward. They had to put in a single software platform, because you and I have covered Poly for a long time. They had all kinds of different silos for software. So this product had these features, this product had these features, and it was a very complicated development methodology that they have. So they simplified that. They go to market faster. On the sales side, they did have some issues, and they brought in industry veteran Carl Wiese, who is a rock star sales guy. Anybody that's been in the collaboration space knows who he is. But then he had to restart everything almost from scratch as well. And so, in the midst of all that, Logitech, if you remember, tried to buy him. And so that threw another monkey wrench into it, because I know it's from talking to some of the channel, it did stall some sales, because people are like, well, is Logitech going to buy you or not? Right. So we're waiting for that to pan out too. So when you put all those things together, I do think the company under Joe Burton was in the right direction. You probably just needed another quarter or two. And I'm not, I think Dave Scholl, from what I've seen him as pedigree, is a pretty, looks like he's pretty talented. I'd like to see more from him as an analyst. I don't think we've really had a lot of, I don't think anybody's had a lot of exposure to him. So that would be nice to see. But even that transition, Bob Haggerty stayed in that role, I thought, a little too long. And so, perhaps the turkey here is just that, that even though they wanted to go through a leadership change, they probably should have done it a little faster, or just given Joe a little bit more time and then transition that over to Dave Scholl. So number 2 on our list of turkeys is Slack. And so what can you say about Slack? We've been talking a lot about Slack, and I wrote that thing about, might they buy Fuse? There's rumors now that Salesforce might buy them. And I think this follows the trend, Dave, that we've talked about a long time, that it's really difficult in this industry to be a point product. In fact, if you look at all the companies in the communication space, Slack's one of the few that hasn't got a work from home POP. And that's pretty unusual for a technology that enables people to work from anywhere. The fact that Slack is kind of plodded along and struggled with the financials here or there has been a little bit shocking. But if you look at what's happened in the industry, Zoom's now in phones, Rings in video. All these companies are, Dialpad acquired High Five, Blue Jeans got acquired by Verizon. So more and more you're seeing a consolidation of UCaaS players, and everybody's offering now messaging, video, phone, except for Slack. And I think Slack either needs to get acquired or they need to acquire somebody. And I think the turkey here is just that they've kind of stood pat with what they had and not really evolved their product a whole lot.
Yeah, just to be clear, when we're recording this, all we have is a rumor that Salesforce might acquire Slack. But I have to say, I tweeted a couple of weeks ago that I was getting a little concerned about Slack. I've always really liked Slack. I've always wanted them to be successful. But bottom line is, they did not get a pandemic bump, and almost all of their peers did. And your point about, they're a single application, I'm beginning to get concerned that Slack can't do it on their own, and an acquisition is likely. When I put that out there on Twitter, Salesforce came back. I think that was a strong fit. There were a couple other interesting fits I could have seen. One of them actually being Cisco, which I think would have been interesting. But it's just really sad to see that Slack isn't going to. Well, I shouldn't say isn't trending to make it on its own. I would love to see it make it on its own, though. I think it's a great company.
So this brings us to the number one turkey for enterprise communications for 2020, and it is, drum roll please, Dave, Amazon partnering with Salesforce, or should I say Salesforce partnering with Amazon in the context.
Well, but yes, that was 2019.
It was 2019, but I think we're starting to see the impact now in 2020. And so it was obviously, it was announced in November 2019, but with the pandemic and everything, the CCaaS market really took off in 2020. And so I think it is relevant to this year. And the partnership did make some sense on paper. In fact, the question's been asked of Salesforce for a long time. Should they be in contact center or not? They're the launch point for a lot of the contact center tools. They partner with almost all of them. And Salesforce, though, has steadfastly said they were not going to get into the contact center space because it would be competitive with so many of their partners. And then lo and behold, out of the blue, they did. And it did catch me a little bit by surprise. And I think it caught a lot of their partners by surprise. And, obviously AWS Connect is a set of building blocks that they can use to build their own kind of CCaaS functionality into Service Cloud. But I do think there will be some long-term negative effects for Salesforce because it did irk a lot of their partners. You're seeing their partners now partner with other contact center companies. They may not have done that before. And I think while it makes some sense on paper, I do think it could come back to bite them. So what are your thoughts, Dave?
Well, it was a big surprise when it was announced, and I think a lot of people were shocked by it, and nothing really happened immediately, which is why it's more appropriate to discuss it in 2020. But, it's two 800-pound gorillas, so I understand why they're working together. But at the same time, contact center space is not dominated by 800-pound gorillas. And so, in fact, every contact center provider is pretty much working their hardest, or was working their hardest, to make Salesforce happy and work with Salesforce, and hoping that Salesforce might give them some sort of nod. In fact, I know that when they picked Amazon, they kind of went out to bid, and a lot of these companies participated, but they ended up going with Amazon. And I think it was the wrong message, or the wrong thing to do, because you had the entire ecosystem kind of courting and working and trying to be better at each other, at working with Salesforce. But like Vonage, for example, which was 100% pure Salesforce with their new voice media solution that they acquired, is now diversifying into Dynamics, and I think it's ServiceNow and a few others. And it's like that loyalty is gone. And I know Five9 last year was talking all the time about Salesforce. Don't really hear it so much this year. They all talk about Salesforce. I mean, I don't mean to suggest that they're going the other way, but it's just, I think Salesforce really sent a wrong message. CCaaS is a very innovative space. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I think they basically stifled innovation and stifled the partnerships. And I think companies are doing different things and approaching enterprise customer engagement in a less Salesforce-centric way than they were. So I think it was a mistake on Salesforce to do that, and particularly because Amazon is, a bunch of tools. There's nothing wrong with Salesforce making tools available and that work with Amazon and work with everybody else. But to kind of pick a favorite or give Amazon a nod, I think was the wrong thing to do.
So that wraps up the top turkeys of communications for 2020. This brings week 48 to a close. We'll be back next week with week 49. The year is just continuing to roll on. So Dave, thanks very much for this, and see you next week.